The lights hit like lightning. The studio audience roars, that familiar Fox energy pulsing through the air. Greg Gutfeld leans forward on his desk, smirking into the camera like he's about to drop a grenade. "All right," he says, his voice sharp and amused. "You came here for Harry Potter, not Hogwarts 101. Let's talk about the real witch war." The crowd laughs. They know something's coming. It's not the kind of magic anyone expected. No wands, no spells, no butterbeer. This time, it's betrayal, politics, and the price of saying what you really think. The kind of story that makes Twitter explode and PR agents lose sleep. Years ago, J.K. Rowling, the creator of that entire enchanted universe, did what she always does. She wrote. But this time, it wasn't a fantasy novel. It was a few short words about protecting women's spaces. She dared to say that maybe, just maybe, women's locker rooms shouldn't include biological men. That's all it took. One tweet, one sentence, and the internet lit up like a cursed castle at midnight. Death threats, hit pieces, hashtags. She didn't just anger the mob. She triggered the full cancel culture firing squad. And while Rowling was getting slammed with hate and danger, the actors she made rich her own magical kids piled on. Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and yes, Emma Watson, the golden girl who played Hermione, all stepped forward, not to defend the woman who gave them the world, but to side with the mob. Greg's voice cuts through the noise. They could have shown the courage of the characters they played, but they didn't. They chose the bad guys. The studio falls silent. You can almost hear the weight of those words. Rowling, once hailed as the queen of imagination, now stood alone. No allies, no safe harbor. The franchise she built, the one that turned 3 unknown children into millionaires, disowned her. The irony burned hotter than dragonfire. Greg lets the beat hang, then smirks again. "Remember," he says, "Rowling was smeared as anti-trans, when that was about as safe as unprotected sex with Hunter Biden." The audience howls. The joke lands, but the truth behind it is sharp. Rowling didn't fold. She didn't delete. She stood her ground. And that was the moment everything changed. The show cuts to clips old red carpet interviews. Smiling faces. Emma Watson gushing about girl power and equality. Then, the contrast, Rowling's calm, almost weary expression in a recent interview, her eyes steady, her tone unshaken. She doesn't shout. She doesn't explain. She simply exists, and that alone drives her critics insane. Greg's voice returns, steady, dry, cutting. "You know what makes this so wild? Before fame hit Rowling, she worked temp jobs, divorced, depressed, denied by 12 publishers, rejected more times than Joe Biden's memory." The laughter rolls again, but it's mixed with admiration now. Everyone in that studio knows Rowling earned every scar. The camera pans across the panel. Emily Compagno nods, her expression tight with respect. Tyrus cracks a smile, half grin, half glare. They know this isn't just another pop culture spat. It's the story of a woman who built a kingdom out of words, only to be exiled by her own subjects. Greg leans back, the fire behind his eyes flickering. And while she was fighting off mobs, getting death threats, those actors she made rich were out there virtue signaling on Twitter. You tell me who's the real hero in this story. The audience doesn't answer. They don't have to. You can feel it, the shift, the recognition. The crowd that once might have laughed at Rowling's controversy now sees her differently, not as the witch to burn, but as the woman who never flinched. The lights dim slightly. Greg glances down at his notes, then looks back up, smirk returning like a magician ready for Act 2. "Stick around," he says, voice low, confident. "Because the broom fight's just getting started." The music swells, the applause rises. And as the camera cuts to commercial, one thing is clear: this isn't just a TV segment. It's the beginning of a reckoning. The studio lights fade to a softer glow. The screen behind Greg flickers to life, playing a clip of Emma Watson sitting in a spotless, sunlit room, her tone calm, careful, and just a little bit rehearsed. I can love her, she says slowly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I can know she loved me, I can be grateful to her, and I can know the things she said are true, and that can be this whole other thing. Her voice trembles just enough to sound human. It is my deepest wish, she continues, that I hope people who don't agree with my opinion can love me, and I hope I can keep loving people who I don't necessarily share the same opinion with. The clip ends. For a moment, the room is quiet. Greg leans back in his chair, eyebrows raised. A Hollywood kumbaya moment, he says, that trademark smirk creeping across his face. Only 5 years late. The audience bursts out laughing. The timing is perfect, but the truth in his tone hits deeper. You can almost hear the skepticism humming underneath the punchline. He tilts his head, the sarcasm dripping just enough to sting. Isn't it interesting, he says, how when the woke train starts losing steam, suddenly it's all about forgiveness and love. Emily Compagno chuckles from across the panel, shaking her head. Yeah, Greg, she adds. Now that woke's gone broke, everyone's preaching peace. The crowd claps, half laughing, half nodding. Greg's voice lowers, more deliberate now. Look, I'm not saying she doesn't mean it. Maybe she does. Maybe she's just tired of the noise. But come on, this is Hollywood. Nothing happens without a reason. He pauses just long enough for the audience to hang on his words. And the timing? Priceless. Just as the cultural winds start shifting, Emma suddenly finds her heart again. The studio screen flashes split images. Emma on one side, her expression serene. Rowling on the other, stoic, unsmiling, unbothered. It's not a feud anymore, it's a study in contrasts. One woman trying to rebuild her image, the other standing firm in her truth. Tyrus leans forward, his voice rumbling low. I mean, come on. If Rowling hadn't been vindicated by now, would Emma be saying any of this? He shrugs. Feels like PR damage control wrapped in a Hallmark card. The audience laughs again, but there's a current of agreement running beneath it. Greg lets the laughter fade before he speaks again. Still, he says, you can hear it in her tone. There's something there, maybe guilt, maybe regret, but it's real enough to make you wonder if she's finally realizing what the rest of us saw years ago. He pauses, tapping his pen against the desk. That the woman she turned on, she was never the villain. The music bed hums quietly beneath his last line. The camera zooms in slightly, catching Greg's expression, half amusement, half reflection. So here we are, he says softly. The student reaching out to the teacher. But the question is, does the teacher even want to hear it? The lights shift again. The mood deepens. The screen fades to black just before commercial, leaving that question hanging in the air, an unfinished spell waiting to be cast. The lights rise again, sharper this time, almost electric. Greg's grin returns, that sly half-smile that says he knows something the rest of us don't. So Emma tried the whole peace and love routine, he starts, flicking through his notes like a man unwrapping a gift he already knows he'll enjoy. But J.K. Rowling, she didn't just respond. She dropped a letter that hit harder than a Quidditch bludger to the face. The audience laughs, leaning forward. She took that olive branch, Greg says, voice tightening with mock sympathy, and smacked Emma upside the head with it. The screen behind him lights up with Rowling's words, simple, poised, and lethal. Her voice plays over the speakers, quiet but cutting. When I was 14, it begins. I wasn't a multimillionaire. I was living in poverty. I was divorced. I was writing in cafes while my baby slept beside me. I wasn't privileged. I was fighting to survive. The studio goes still for a beat, the kind of silence that comes before thunder. Greg chuckles softly. That's not a statement, he says. That's a surgical strike. Another clip flashes on screen, Rowling again, unflinching. I've been rejected by 12 publishers, she continues, mocked, dismissed, told my stories wouldn't sell, but I kept writing. I built something from nothing. And now, those who owe their fame to those words lecture me on morality. The audience gasps, then bursts into applause. Greg raises an eyebrow. "Oh, she's not done yet," he warns. The next line lands like a blade. "Perhaps," Rowling writes, "Miss Watson forgets that the luxury of moral posturing is affordable only to those who've never known fear, rejection, or hunger. She will never know what it's like to need a women's shelter, to be threatened, to live one paycheck from collapse." Greg leans back, letting the words breathe. "Damn," Tyrus mutters, shaking his head. "She dragged her straight to Azkaban." The room erupts in laughter. Kat wipes a tear from the corner of her eye, half laughing, half stunned. "That's what happens," she says, "when you pick a fight with a writer. They don't yell. They immortalize your mistake." The crowd roars again, clapping, whistling. Greg jumps back in, his voice speeding up like a drumbeat. The internet's on fire. Hashtags everywhere. You've got Hollywood melting down faster than vegan cheese on a summer sidewalk. Every blue-check account pretending they didn't throw her under the bus 5 years ago. He mimics the tone of a panicked celebrity. "We've always loved Jo. We totally supported her work." The audience howls. "Yeah," Greg sneers, "after she proved she could survive without you." Emily Compagno leans in, her tone sharp and steady. "There's something incredible about it," she says. "She didn't scream. She didn't cancel back. She just wrote clear, precise, devastating. That's what real power looks like. She's not the one melting down on social media at 2 in the morning. She's the one sipping tea while her words do the work." Greg nods. "That's British warfare right there. Cold, classy, and brutal." Kat jumps in, still smiling. "You know what's wild," she says. "Emma wanted peace. She got prose. And prose hurts more than any Twitter clapback." Greg laughs, snapping his fingers. "Exactly. Rowling didn't tweet. She wrote a literary punch in perfect grammar." The camera cuts between the panelists, their banter crackling with energy. Tyrus leans forward again. "You can feel it," he says. "This isn't just about one celebrity trying to clean up her image. It's about an entire generation that built its identity on pretending to be oppressed, getting called out by someone who actually struggled." The crowd cheers, the applause rising like a wave. Greg raises a finger. "And that's the thing, Tyrus. Rowling didn't change. The culture did. 5 years ago, they called her a monster. Now half of Twitter's pretending she's Mother Teresa with a wand. Funny how truth works. It takes time to trend." The studio lights flicker warmer as Greg looks back at the camera, his tone softening but his grin still there. "Look," he says, "whether you love her or hate her, you can't deny one thing. She earned every inch of that stage. She fought her own battles, without PR handlers or Hollywood pity parties. She stood in the storm and didn't blink." He pauses, letting the applause rise again. "Meanwhile, Emma's out here discovering empathy like it's a new skincare brand." The laughter is loud now, uncontrolled. Greg's voice rides over it with one last smirk. "Lesson 1, kids," he says, tapping his pen against the desk for effect. "Don't go toe-to-toe with a writer who sells 100 million books." The music cue hits. The crowd claps, whistles, someone shouts, "Preach!" Greg leans back in his chair, that satisfied half-grin returning as the camera pans across the studio. Rowling's words still linger in the air, unapologetic, undeniable, unstoppable. The lights fade just as the applause crests, and for a moment, it feels like the entire world just witnessed the real magic of J.K. Rowling, the kind that doesn't need a wand to hit its mark. The music fades back in with a low thrum, the kind that says it's time for a reality check. Greg leans forward, elbows on the desk, his expression shifting from amusement to something sharper. "You know what really kills me about this whole feud?" he says, eyes narrowing. "The contrast. It's like watching two people live on completely different planets." The screen flashes on one side, J.K. Rowling in a small cafe, pen in hand, scribbling notes while her baby sleeps in a stroller beside her. On the other, Emma Watson, on a red carpet, dripping diamonds, cameras flashing like fireworks. That's it right there. Greg says. One woman built her empire with a pen and cold coffee. The other was handed hers with a PR team and a stylist. The crowd murmurs with laughter, a mix of awe and irony. Emma's never bombed a math test or changed a tire, Greg continues, the grin creeping back. She's got assistants for that. The line lands like a dart. The audience bursts out laughing. Emily Compagno shakes her head, chuckling, but her tone turns serious when she speaks. She'll never know what it's like to share a women's shelter or fear a public restroom, she says. That's the thing. Her world is safe, polished, protected. The rest of us don't get that luxury. Greg nods, his expression softening for a second. Exactly. Rowling lived through the real stuff. Poverty, rejection, divorce. She's been there. She knows what danger looks like. What risk feels like. Emma's biggest risk is a bad headline or a lukewarm Rotten Tomatoes score. The crowd hums, the laughter fading into agreement. Rowling was writing in cafes, broke, surviving off hope and caffeine, while Emma was probably picking out which private school uniform looked cuter. Tyrus leans forward, his deep voice rolling through the room. This is the bubble problem, man, he says. You live in that Hollywood life too long, you forget what normal feels like. You forget what struggle even means. When you've got personal assistants and filtered bathrooms, you start thinking the world's all soft edges. But it's not. Out here, reality hits back. The crowd applauds, a few whistles cutting through. That's why Rowling's words cut so deep, Emily adds. They come from scars, not slogans. Greg glances toward the camera, tone turning sly again. And let's not forget, he says. While Emma's living in her single-occupancy bathroom fantasy world, Rowling's been out here pointing at the real mess. The screen behind him flashes headlines, school locker room controversies, trans athletes dominating women's sports, protests outside school boards. These aren't make-believe problems, Greg says. They're real. They're happening. And Rowling had the guts to say it before anyone else did. He flips a card dramatically, grinning. Remember that case in Virginia? Some dude walks into a girl's locker room, flashes himself, and the school says, well, as long as he says he's a woman. He pauses for effect, the audience already laughing. His name, get this, is literally Dick Cox. The laughter explodes, echoing off the studio walls. Greg throws his hands up. You can't make this up. If that guy can pass as a chick, I'm Sydney Sweeney. The room erupts again, a mix of shock and laughter, the kind that carries a truth too absurd not to laugh at. Greg lets the noise settle before he speaks again, his tone dropping lower, steadier. This is what Rowling was fighting for. Not fame, not politics, just sanity, just reality. He looks down at his desk, then back into the camera with that same piercing grin. And that's why she wins, every time. Because she's not living in a bubble. She's living in the world the rest of us actually have to survive. The crowd applauds, rising again into a wave of noise that feels almost defiant. The music swells. Greg smirks, tapping his pen once more. Up next, he says, the meltdown you knew was coming. Because when the truth lands this hard, someone's bound to lose it on live TV. The lights flash, the logo spins, and the segment cuts to break, leaving laughter, fire, and a faint trace of truth hanging in the air. The studio energy spikes like a power surge. You can feel it in the floor, in the seats, in the breath between laughs. Greg leans into the camera with that fox in the henhouse grin and drops it clean. The culture war's turning, DEI's DOA. The crowd hits with a low rolling cheer that swells into claps and whistles. He doesn't blink. He knows the beat. He rides it. The screen behind him explodes into a quick-cut montage, the kind that feels like a drum solo. Headlines flash. Feminist athletes at podiums, voices tight, eyes fierce. Clips of girls with bruised cheeks and broken records that never belonged to men. A scrolling storm of posts and think pieces. Then the hashtag that won't stay down floods the wall in pure white letters on black. Number Rowling was right. The audience reacts like they've been waiting to breathe. Applause that sounds like a verdict. The cut slashes to Emma in softer times, red carpet glow, diamonds firing under camera flash. She smiles, hair perfect, pose perfect, brand perfect. The next cut is the now, timelines full of side eyes, comment sections roasting, headlines second guessing, influencers doing the shoulder shrug you do when the party's over and the bill is due. The contrast hits hard and fast. Past Emma floats, framed and filtered. Present Emma glitches in a swarm of push notifications and polite PR statements that read like a hostage note. Greg clocks the room and turns the knife with a whisper that lands like a shout. Without J.K. Rowling, Emma's just a misspelled name on a Starbucks cup. It detonates. The audience convulses, laughter ricocheting off the rafters, a few people snorting, others pounding the armrests like they're courtside. Someone in the back waves an invisible wand and hollers, Expelliarmus. Another answers with, Wingardium Leviosa. Mock spells fly. It's ridiculous and perfect. The studio's a live meme. Emily Campagno is grinning, but her eyes are steel. You can't beat lived experience with a press release, she says, voice crisp. No mercy in it. Rowling ate the threats. She ate the cancellations. She ate the silence from people who owed her everything, and she's still standing. Tyrus leans into his mic, all bass and smirk. Ain't a spell for that, he rumbles. You either got spine or you don't. Cat nods, deadpan as a rimshot. And if you try to borrow one, Amazon's out of stock. The montage keeps pulsing in the background. Clips of Rowling, walking, not rushing, coat trailing, hair in the kind of wind that looks hired, eyes steady. She doesn't smile and doesn't need to. She's not here to bask. She's here to be unbothered. A lower third graphic rolls by like a headline you can't dodge. From canceled to canon. The room eats it up. Greg taps the desk with his pen. 1, 2, 3. Here's what changed, he says, voice dropping into that midnight radio register. Not her. You. He points. Not accusatory. Just true. Audiences, parents, athletes, women who live in the real world. They got tired of being told they're crazy for seeing what they see. A beat. And when the vibe flipped, Hollywood did that thing it always does. It sprinted back to the right side like they got frequent flyer miles for contrition. There's a chuckle, but the nods are heavier than the laughs. A new set of clips. School board meetings on fire, moms with binders, a coach who won't duck the question, a headline about records reinstated, another about policies reviewed. Nothing flashy, just guardrails going back up. Greg watches the wall like it's telling him a story he already knows the ending to. Vindication, he says, tasting the word. It doesn't come with confetti. It comes with clarity. The camera pushes in, inches at a time, until you can see the glint in his eye. He pivots back to Emma with surgical casual. You had your kumbaya, good for you. But reconciliation isn't a photo op, it's a receipt. He taps the air, beat by beat. And the bill's been itemized. The crowd shifts from laughter to that warm thrum that happens when people decide something together. Emily steps back in, softer now. Maybe she learns, she says. Maybe they all do. That's the point of being an adult. You learn, you adjust. You say, I'm sorry, and you don't make it about you. Kat adds the kicker, light and lethal. And you don't post it with a black and white filter and 17 hashtags. Tyrus throws the log on the fire. Or do a podcast tour titled, My Truth, Season 1. Greg lets them cook, then whistles them back with a tiny tilt of the head. Here's the Hollywood twist, he says, smiling because the punchline is already in the air. The hero arc you tried to write for the actress? He points to the wall, where Rowling's silhouette crosses a bank of flashes like she's walking through a storm she hired. It belongs to the author. The audience rises into a wave applause, whistles, a few standing, a few mock wand flicks. Someone shouts, "Protect women's sports." Another yells, "Rowling forever." The energy isn't angry. It's relieved. It's the sound people make when the movie finally gives the protagonist her sword back. Greg times the crest and surfs it. And that's catharsis, he says, Crisp, clean. Not revenge, not rage. Just the truth. Finally louder than the noise. He leans back, plants the pen, and tags it like a comic closing a tight set. Class dismissed. The music punches in on cue, a triumphant measure that doesn't beg for cheers so much as confirm them. The last image on the wall is simple and merciless. Number Rowling was right, steady as a heartbeat, refusing to scroll away. And for once, nobody in the room tries to argue with it. They just let the feeling land, the sense that the spell broke, the fog cleared, and the person who never bowed doesn't have to explain herself anymore. The energy in the room eases down like a tide pulling back from shore. The laughter fades, the applause softens, and what's left is that rare silence that means something landed. The lights dim slightly, the camera angle widens, and Greg's voice comes in lower, slower, like he's been waiting to say this all along. Courage isn't about casting spells, he says. It's about standing alone when the mob's lighting torches. The tone isn't funny now, it's steady. You can almost feel the weight of it in the air. The screen behind him glows with one last image, Rowling walking down a quiet London street. No red carpet, no stage lights, just her coat collar up, the cold wind catching her hair. Cameras flash, voices call her name, but she doesn't turn. She doesn't need to. Her walk is calm, unhurried, the kind of walk you earn when you've survived everything they said you couldn't. Emma Watson's face appears for half a second, frozen in a press photo. Perfect lighting, flawless skin, eyes that don't quite know where to look. Her silence now says more than any apology could. It isn't vengeance, it's gravity. Poetic justice in motion. The same audience that once called Rowling a villain now calls her brave. The same people who said she should be cancelled now quote her like scripture. Greg's voice continues, softer but unwavering. The witch they tried to burn, he says, pausing for just half a breath, lit her own fire. The audience stays quiet, no laughter this time, just nods. It's the kind of line that doesn't need applause, it sinks in and stays there. Forgiveness versus accountability. Strength versus image. Rowling didn't ask for redemption. She created it. In a town built on illusion, she chose truth, and truth never ages well in Hollywood. The camera catches Greg looking off camera for a second, maybe at a producer, maybe at nothing at all, then back to lens center. Funny thing about storms, he says, they make it easy to see who can actually stand in the rain. The music swells beneath him, a low hum of strings that feels like closing credits for a story that still hasn't finished writing itself. The outro beat hits a mix of tense strings fading into something almost triumphant. Greg straightens in his chair, that trademark half-smile returning, though softer now. If you've ever been cancelled for telling the truth, he says, voice regaining that familiar swagger, take notes from the OG of Hogwarts. The crowd cheers, lighter this time. Not rowdy, just proud. He points toward the camera, his tone playful again. Smash that like button. Drop a fire emoji for Rowling. And don't forget to subscribe for more truth bombs every night. The laughter returns, short and warm. The studio lights pulse once, then dim to a calm gold glow. The final screen fades in behind him. Rowling's silhouette, walking into the distance. The city lights glimmering like embers. The end card text slides across the bottom in bold white letters. She finally had enough. Hollywood didn't see this coming. The music fades. No applause now. No outro jokes. No cutaway smiles. Just that final image. The writer who survived the mob. The actress left with her silence. And a reminder echoing in the dark. Some stories don't end with magic. They end with truth.